The parish hall sat on the edge of the small town, a quiet place where people gathered for charity dinners, small concerts, and community meetings. On this particular evening, the hall felt more alive than usual. Families filled the rows of simple wooden chairs. Children whispered and giggled. The smell of homemade soup drifted from the kitchen, and a warm orange light glowed from the hanging lamps. People had come for a charity event to raise money for repairing the church roof. Everyone expected the usual things: short speeches, a few songs, and some light-hearted jokes. Nothing more. No one imagined that something unforgettable would take place. Among the people moving around the hall was a quiet nun, known as Sister Helena. She was not the type of person who liked attention. She rarely spoke unless necessary, and when she did, her voice was soft and gentle. People respected her, but they didn't know much about her. She kept her past to herself, never bragging or sharing stories. She was simply known as someone who helped anyone in need. As the evening went on, the parish priest walked onto the small stage and welcomed everyone. The crowd clapped politely. The first musical performance was a group of local children singing a song. Parents smiled proudly and cheered a little too loudly. Then someone played a short piece on a violin. Then came a poetry reading. Everything was going smoothly until the moment that started it all. Near the back of the hall sat a man named Dorian, a man known for his bold opinions and his loud voice. He wasn't a bad person, but he didn't take anything seriously. People had learned to expect jokes from him, sometimes funny, sometimes hurtful. He didn't attend church often, and when he did, he usually made sarcastic remarks. During a short break between performances, someone near him whispered, "Maybe Sister Helena should play the old piano." It was meant as a light-hearted comment, but Dorian heard it. He burst out laughing so loudly that half the hall turned to look. "If she plays the piano, I'll repent right here," he shouted, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye. The people around him chuckled nervously. A few looked away awkwardly, and a few others whispered, concerned that he had gone too far. But Dorian didn't notice. He leaned back in his chair, full of confidence. Meanwhile, Sister Helena stood near the side of the stage. She had heard the comment, but she didn't react. Her expression didn't change. She simply folded her hands calmly, as she always did. The priest gave Dorian a warning glance, but didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at the old piano standing in the corner. It was dusty, slightly out of tune, and rarely used. Only a few people even touched it anymore. But he also knew something the others didn't. Years ago, long before devoting her life to service, Sister Helena had spent much of her youth learning music. She had studied in a respected place, training for a future in music. But after her mother passed away, her life changed. She chose a different path, one that had nothing to do with fame or applause. She never spoke about her talent. She never asked to perform. She simply lived quietly, helping where she could. The priest walked over to her and whispered, "Would you like to play something? Only if you are comfortable." Sister Helena looked at the piano, then at the people, who were now watching her with curiosity. She noticed some amused smiles, but also some genuine interest. She paused for a moment, as if looking inside herself for the answer. Then she nodded. The hall grew quieter. Even the children stopped whispering. People weren't sure whether she had agreed because she wanted to or because she felt pressured. A few worried the moment would turn into embarrassment. Others thought she might surprise them, though they had no clear reason why. Dorian leaned forward in his chair again, smirking. "This should be good," he muttered. Sister Helena walked slowly toward the piano. Her steps were measured and graceful, though anyone paying close attention would notice a slight tremble in her hands. When she reached the bench, she brushed off a thin layer of dust and sat down. The old wooden bench creaked under her weight. The piano keys looked tired, some of them yellowed with age. The lid made a dull sound as she lifted it. She placed her hands gently above the keys but didn't play yet. For a long moment, she simply breathed. The room was so quiet that even the smallest sound echoed. People waited. She closed her eyes. Meanwhile, Dorian continued watching her with the same amused expression. A few people near him exchanged glances. This was no longer funny. It was starting to feel like something important was happening. The hall's atmosphere shifted. A sense of expectation settled over the crowd. Something unspoken told them the moment mattered. They didn't know why, but they felt it. Sister Helena slowly opened her eyes and pressed one key. The sound was soft, fragile, almost uncertain. A few people held their breath. Then she pressed another. Her fingers rested lightly on the keyboard, as if reconnecting with an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Her shoulders relaxed a little. her breathing steady. The priest, standing near the side, watched her with calm confidence. He knew this was her choice, not something forced. Whatever happened next would come from her heart. People leaned in without even realizing it. Some sat up straighter. Even the children were silent. Sister Helena's hands finally settled on the keys, ready to begin. And in that pause just before a single real note was played, the room felt as if it were holding one shared breath. No one knew that in the next moments, everything would change, not just for the people watching, not just for the priest, but for Dorian, the man who had laughed the loudest. He did not yet know how deeply the next few minutes would reach into him. And Sister Helena, humble as she was, did not yet know that choosing to sit at that old piano would open a door she thought she had closed forever. The hall waited. Sister Helena lowered her hands, and the story began to unfold. Sister Helena sat at the old piano, her back straight, but her hands resting lightly on the keys, almost like she was afraid of disturbing something sacred. The hall, which had been full of chatter and movement just minutes earlier, now felt strangely still. People were watching her closely, but not in a judgmental way, more like they were waiting for something they couldn't quite explain. The children who had been whispering non-stop earlier now stayed frozen in their seats. Even the clinking sounds from the kitchen had quieted. The whole place carried the kind of silence that happens before a storm or before a miracle. It was impossible for anyone to tell which one it would be. Sister Helena took a slow breath. Her fingers hovered above the piano, but she still hadn't played anything more than the two faint notes from before. Those two notes alone had already changed the atmosphere of the room. Something felt different, though no one could say exactly what had shifted. The priest watched from the side of the stage. He didn't smile, but his eyes were warm. He knew a part of Helena's past that she rarely let anyone see. He had always respected that she kept her talent hidden, though he never understood why she buried it so deeply. Tonight, he sensed she was stepping into a moment she hadn't planned, but one she needed. Dorian, however, sat with his arms crossed, still wearing a smirk, though it was fading. He was no longer laughing, but he wasn't worried either. In his mind, nothing big was going to happen. To him, the idea of a nun playing the piano well seemed almost amusing. It wasn't that he disliked her. He just thought the idea of her playing something impressive was unlikely. But as seconds passed and Sister Helena still hadn't started playing, even he felt a tiny sense of tension rising inside him. He didn't like tension. He preferred making people laugh, or at least distracting himself with jokes. Serious moments made him uncomfortable. Finally, Sister Helena placed both hands softly on the keys. The gesture was small, but somehow the whole room leaned in. Her posture straightened a bit more, as if settling into a familiar space. She looked down at the keyboard, and for the first time that night, there was the slightest hint of a smile, not a wide one, but a gentle one that came from somewhere deep within her. It was the smile of someone who had once loved something, but had kept it locked away for a long time. She closed her eyes again, not to hide from the crowd but to remember. It was as if she needed to feel the piano before she could let herself play it. When her fingers finally moved, the sound was soft, barely louder than a whisper. A fragile note floated into the room, followed by another, and then another. At first, the tune felt uncertain, like someone walking on a path they hadn't stepped on in years. The notes trembled slightly, then steadied, then trembled again. The people in the audience exchanged quiet glances. They hadn't expected much, but something about the way she played those first few notes didn't feel ordinary. It didn't sound like someone testing an instrument. It sounded like someone waking up a part of themselves they had forgotten. The priest's expression softened. Dorian shifted in his chair and sat up a little straighter, though he didn't know why he did it. Sister Helena's fingers picked up a gentle rhythm. The melody wasn't fast or flashy. It wasn't the kind of music meant to show off skill. It was calm, delicate, almost like a lullaby. But there was something underneath it, a quiet sadness mixed with warmth, like sunlight passing through a window on a cold morning. People began to sense that she wasn't just playing a random tune. She was playing something that meant something to her, something that had been with her long before she became a nun. Her hands moved slowly, but with purpose. Even though the piano was old and the sound wasn't perfect, she shaped the melody in a way that made the imperfect notes blend together beautifully. Each one carried feeling. Each one seemed to say something that words couldn't. A few people in the audience blinked in surprise. Some tilted their heads, trying to understand the emotion behind the sound. Others simply listened, not needing to understand, just needing to feel. Sister Helena kept playing, her eyes still closed, With every note, she sank deeper into the music. Her shoulders relaxed, her breaths grew steadier, and her fingers started flowing more easily across the keys. It was as if her body remembered something her mind had tried to forget. She wasn't thinking about the people watching her. She wasn't thinking about Dorian's earlier comment. She wasn't even thinking about the hall. In that moment, she was somewhere far away, somewhere only she could see. The melody shifted. What had started as soft and uncertain slowly grew warmer, fuller. The notes carried a sense of longing, gentle but deep. It was the kind of feeling that made people sit very still without even realizing they were doing it. The hall remained completely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. Even the children didn't move. Dorian, who had begun the evening in a joking mood, felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him. He didn't understand music well. He didn't know anything about tones or rhythm. But even he could tell that something about the way she played wasn't simple. There was weight in it, something emotional, something real. He frowned slightly, but not because he was annoyed. It was confusion. Confusion mixed with the faintest hint of discomfort, as if the music was touching a part of him he didn't want anyone, not even himself, to touch. Sister Helena's fingers glided through another gentle phrase of the melody. Her breath shook just a little, like she was remembering something painful. But she didn't stop playing. Instead, she allowed the feeling to guide her hands. The priest stepped back a little, giving her space. He knew that sometimes, music was not just music. Sometimes, it was a way of bringing buried feelings back to the surface. And he could see that this moment mattered for her as much as it did for the audience. The melody grew richer, not louder, just deeper. The kind of depth that made people feel something inside their chest. A few people blinked back tears without understanding why. Others simply held their breath. Sister Helena's expression softened as she played. There was a peace in her face now, but also a quiet ache. It was a kind of emotion that didn't need words. Her fingers slowed slightly, guiding the room into a softer, quieter passage. The notes came out like whispers, gentle, fragile, full of tenderness. That was when a memory flashed across her mind. Her mother's hands guiding her tiny fingers across the piano keys when she was just a child. The warm evenings they had spent together practicing. The way her mother listened to her play with a smile that made everything in the world feel safe. It had been years since she allowed herself to think about it. Too many years. Her breath trembled again, and she let it. She didn't fight the memory. She let the music hold it. The audience didn't know what she was remembering, but they could feel it. And sometimes, feeling something is more powerful than knowing. Another soft note floated into the room, then another. Sister Helena's hands moved with a gentleness that made even the air feel delicate. Dorian swallowed hard, though he didn't understand why. The smirk was gone from his face now. For the first time that night, he wasn't thinking about jokes. He wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. He wasn't even thinking about himself. He was simply listening. The hall, once filled with laughter and movement, now felt like a sacred space. Not because of religion, not because of rituals, but because something real was happening. Something honest, something human. Sister Helena continued playing, and the melody kept unfolding like a story that had waited years to be told. And the people listened not because they had to, but because they couldn't look away. No one knew yet what this music would lead to. No one knew how deeply it would touch the heart of the man who had mocked her. But something had already begun to shift. In the room. In the people. And slowly, quietly, inside Dorian too, and Sister Helena, still lost in the melody, had no idea that with each note she played, she was awakening something far bigger than the room around her. The music continued, and the moment deepened, carrying everyone into the unfolding story that none of them would ever forget. The melody that flowed from the old piano grew warmer and steadier, filling the hall with a gentle strength no one had expected. Sister Helena's fingers moved with a soft confidence now, like someone rediscovering a path they used to walk every day. The room around her seemed to fade away, leaving only the music, the soft glow of the lamps, and the stillness of the crowd. People who had come only for a simple charity evening now sat frozen, unable to look away. The melody spoke to them in a way words rarely did. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't flashy. It was honest, the kind of music that carried real memories, real heart. A woman in the front row pressed her hands against her chest without realizing it. A man beside her blinked more often than usual, trying to hide the small shine in his eyes. The children, who usually grew restless during long events, now sat quietly, mesmerized by the soft notes. Even the kitchen workers had paused, leaning in the doorway to listen. Sister Helena didn't notice any of this. Her mind had slipped far beyond the walls of the parish hall. Every note she played brought back moments from her past, moments she had locked away for years. She remembered sitting beside her mother on quiet evenings, the two of them sharing the warmth of a tiny room filled with love and music. Her mother's hands guiding hers, her mother's voice encouraging her, her mother's presence that had felt like home. She remembered the pain of losing that warmth, the silence that followed, and the heavy ache that had refused to leave. She remembered choosing to walk away from everything she once dreamed of, believing her heart would never be ready to play again. But here she was playing, and something inside her was healing. The melody drifted into a deeper phase, filled with emotion that felt almost like a confession. The notes were still soft, but carried a weight that made the air thicken. The audience could feel the change. They didn't know what she was remembering, but they understood the feeling behind it. And for many of them, that feeling touched old memories of their own. In the middle rows, Dorian sat completely still. His earlier smirk had long faded. He didn't even have the energy to pretend he wasn't affected. Something in the music reached straight into him, pulling at memories he had worked hard to bury. He tried to brush the feeling away, but it stayed. It grew. He suddenly remembered being a child, sitting on the floor of his mother's small room while she folded laundry, humming a soft tune he hadn't thought about in years. He remembered her voice, gentle, calming. He remembered the last time he saw her smile. The music felt like that smile. His throat tightened. He shifted in his chair, but that did nothing to push the feeling away. He looked down at the floor, hoping no one would see the way his eyes were softening. The priest, watching everything with a quiet awareness, saw the change in Dorian. He didn't speak. He didn't approach, but he felt a rare moment unfolding, a moment when someone's heart begins to open, without being forced. Sister Helena's fingers moved into a sequence of notes that carried a gentle rise, like a breath after a long cry. The sound brought warmth back into the room, comforting and soft. It was a musical touch on the shoulder, telling everyone, "It's okay, you're not alone." A few people in the crowd wiped their eyes, not openly, not dramatically, just small, quiet motions from people who didn't want to draw attention to themselves. The hall seemed to breathe along with the music. Sister Helena's expression softened further. Tears did not fall from her eyes, but her face showed the calm sadness of someone remembering love, loss, and acceptance all at once. As the melody shifted again, a small ripple of surprise passed through a few listeners. There was something familiar in this part, something that felt like a song they might have heard long ago, even though they couldn't place it. The truth was, she was playing a piece she had once written herself. She had never shared it with anyone. It was a piece she created in her youth when she believed she would spend her life on stage. It was the last composition she made before her mother's illness changed everything. And now, years later, she brought it back to life. The tune rose gently, carrying hope in its sound, hope mixed with a quiet ache, a balance of emotions that only someone who had lived through deep loss could express. The people in the hall listened closely, unknowingly leaning forward as the music invited them deeper. The room felt warmer, as if the lights themselves had softened. Dorian let out a slow breath he didn't realize he was holding. His shoulders dropped. His chest felt tight, but not in an unpleasant way, more like something inside him was opening, stretching after being closed for too long. The memory of his mother sitting by the window came back clearly. She had always hummed when she worked, always soft melodies. He had forgotten how much comfort those sounds gave him. He had forgotten how much he missed them. And now, Sister Helena's music stirred all those forgotten sensations. He rubbed his jaw, pretending it itched, trying to hide the tremble in his lip. He wasn't the type of man who liked showing emotion, especially not in public. But something about this moment made him feel smaller, softer, more human. Sister Helena continued, unaware of the way her music was quietly reshaping the room. The next few notes were slow, almost like quiet footsteps. The melody eased into a peaceful pause, letting the audience breathe again. It felt like a sigh, gentle, relieved. But then, she began a new phrase, one deeper, more emotional, and more revealing. Her fingers pressed the keys with slightly more strength. The melody expanded, filling the hall with a richness that surprised even those who had already been moved. A gasp came from somewhere in the back. Someone whispered, "I never knew she could play like this." But it wasn't just skill they were hearing. It was sincerity. It was her heart. Even the piano, old and worn as it was, seemed to shine with a voice it hadn't used in years. The instrument responded to her touch as if it too had been waiting for this moment. The priest folded his hands, his eyes growing wet. He had always known Helena carried something inside her that she chose not to show, and now he finally saw it. The melody settled into a quiet rhythm again, steady, warm, comforting. She guided the notes with care, as if holding something fragile and precious. Dorian slowly lifted his eyes from the floor. He looked at Sister Helena, still lost in the music, and something inside him cracked open further. He saw not just a nun playing a piano. He saw a human being carrying memories, pain, love just like anyone else. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of humility settle inside him. The music dipped into another soft passage. Sister Helena's fingers slowed, drifting lightly over the keys. The sound softened to a delicate whisper. Everyone in the hall leaned in involuntarily, not wanting to miss a single note. Then came a moment where the melody almost stopped, a pause so gentle and so fragile that it made the entire hall sit completely still. The air felt thick, the lights seemed to dim, even time seemed to hold its breath. Then, from that quietness, Sister Helena played a single, tender note that felt like the start of something new. It was a note filled with hope, a note that felt like opening a window after years of keeping it shut, a note that touched the heart of every person in the hall. And when she moved into the next part of the melody, the entire room exhaled together. People didn't understand how one simple moment could feel so meaningful, but it did. The priest closed his eyes briefly, letting the warmth of the sound wash over him. Dorian, who had once shouted in mockery, now felt tears forming, but he blinked them back quickly. He didn't know what was happening to him. He didn't know how music could do this, but it did. Sister Helena reached a soft, delicate rise in the music, her hands steady, her heart open, and at that moment, something shifted inside Dorian so quietly that he barely noticed it. But the audience felt the shift too. The atmosphere of the hall no longer felt like a charity evening. It felt like something sacred. Not religious. Not ceremonial. Just deeply, honestly human. And Sister Helena, still unaware of the impact she was creating, continued to play, carrying everyone deeper into the gentle, emotional world she had once locked away. The music held the entire hall in its hands, and no one wanted the moment to end. The melody continued like a gentle river, flowing through the hall with a warmth that felt almost alive. Sister Helena's fingers moved with a confidence that had been hidden for years. Her touch was steady but soft, as if she were afraid to disturb the memories she was bringing back to life. The notes carried through the air in waves, rising, falling, comforting, healing. The room had grown so silent that even the soft creak of the piano bench sounded loud. People leaned forward almost unconsciously, drawn in not by force but by something quiet and sincere, something that made them want to listen. The music took a deeper turn, moving into a part of the melody that carried more weight. It was not darker, but fuller, like someone telling the truth after many years of silence. The hall seemed to tighten around the sound, holding it carefully. Some of the older people in the crowd had lived through their own losses, and the softness in the tune reminded them of those they once loved. A few wiped their eyes without shame. Others simply sat still, letting the music touch the parts of their hearts they usually kept hidden. Sister Helena still seemed unaware of the effect she was having. She remained inside the world of the melody, her eyes half closed, her breath steady and controlled, her shoulders relaxed with each note, as though the music itself was loosening knots inside her. The priest watched closely, his expression full of something between pride and sorrow. He knew some pieces of her story enough to understand that this performance wasn't random. It wasn't a show, it was a release. It was an unspoken message carried on each note. And then there was Dorian. He sat very still, staring at Sister Helena as though seeing her for the first time. His usual carefree confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet heaviness that tugged at his chest. The music kept digging deeper, and he could no longer push back the memories it stirred. He remembered being a teenager, laughing loudly with friends, pretending he didn't care about anything. He remembered coming home late while his mother waited with a tired smile, always ready to forgive. He remembered the last words he spoke to her, words he wished he could take back. The music filled the gaps between those memories, turning them into something he could finally face. His throat tightened again. He shifted in his seat, wiping his eyes quickly when he thought no one was looking. But a woman beside him saw, and she gave him a small, understanding nod. He looked away, embarrassed, but he didn't look away from the music. As Sister Helena moved into the next part of the melody, the sound brightened slightly. The notes carried a gentle rise, like someone lifting their head after crying. The shift was small but noticeable, and a few people in the audience sighed a soft, relieved sound. There was hope in the tune now, not loud or dramatic, simple, quiet hope. The kind that grows slowly inside someone's heart. The priest glanced around the hall, taking in the faces so many different lives, all sharing the same moment. It struck him how rare it was for a room full of people to fall into the same emotional rhythm. Yet here they were, breathing almost in unison. Sister Helena softened her touch again. The melody dipped into a tender phrase, slower, more reflective. Her fingers moved carefully, as though she was carrying something fragile across the keyboard. She was. The memory she was holding was delicate, her mother's voice calling her name in the small room they used to share, her mother's hands guiding her, her mother's encouragement when she doubted herself. The music was her way of speaking to someone who was no longer there. It was a message she had never sent. Now she was sending it note by note. The audience didn't know the details, but they felt the truth in the sound, and sometimes, feeling is more powerful than understanding. A soft gasp came from somewhere near the back as the melody opened into a new pattern, something more intricate, more emotional. Sister Helena's hands danced gently across the keys, weaving notes that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. The change surprised people. They hadn't expected such a shift. But the shift wasn't just musical, it was emotional. Sister Helena had gone from remembering to releasing. Her breath shook once, and she let it. Her fingers did not stop. The hall responded as one. People shifted slightly, leaning even closer. The children who had been quiet from the beginning now listened with wide eyes, unable to look away. Dorian felt something inside him begin to break, not in a painful way, but in a way that felt necessary. He thought about his mother again, the way she had always cared, always hoped he would grow into someone kinder, someone calmer. He thought about how he had brushed off her gentle advice. He whispered under his breath, almost without realizing it, "I'm sorry." No one heard him, but someone inside him did. Sister Helena played a series of gentle rising notes that carried through the room, like a message of forgiveness. She had no idea that she was guiding someone back to their own heart. Her hands slowed, again, creating a soft, almost trembling phrase of the melody. It was the emotional center of the piece, the part she had written many years ago, while sitting beside her mother's bed. The notes carried a prayer, not a spoken one, a quiet plea from a daughter who didn't want to lose the person she loved most. And now, years later, the prayer returned, carried by the piano, reaching a room full of people who needed it for different reasons. The room grew warmer. The lights flickered slightly, making the shadows on the wall look softer. The piano sound blended with the stillness of the air. Then, gently, the melody shifted again. This time, it carried acceptance. People could feel it. It wasn't the harsh acceptance of giving up, it was the soft acceptance of letting go. The acceptance that memories can hurt but also comfort. The acceptance that some goodbyes never truly end, because love remains even when people don't. A few people in the hall let their tears fall freely. They didn't hide them anymore. They didn't need to. Even Dorian wiped his cheek, no longer pretending he was fine. He swallowed hard, letting the music pull him somewhere honest. The priest finally sat down in a chair at the side, unable to stand any longer. His hands shook slightly as he watched the woman who had carried so much behind her gentle smile. He understood now that her silence all those years hadn't come from weakness or fear. It had come from love. To deep 4 words. Sister Helena reached another peaceful passage in the melody. Her fingers eased into a calm rhythm. The sound wrapped around the hall like a warm blanket. People closed their eyes without meaning to, letting the music wash over them. The moment felt sacred, not because of religion, but because it was real. Sister Helena pressed into a final emotional rise, letting the melody swell gently. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was warm like a final embrace. The audience felt the shift again. This was the beginning of the end of the piece. The music softened, slowing down. Her hands moved gently across the keys, leaving quiet spaces between the notes. The silence between them felt just as meaningful as the sound. Her breaths became deep and calm. She was returning from the world she had visited, returning to the room, returning to herself. The melody curled into one last delicate phrase, soft, warm, and full of lingering emotion. She ended on a gentle note that floated in the air for a long moment before fading. When the sound finally disappeared, the hall stayed quiet. No one moved, no one clapped, no one wanted to break the silence. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of awe. Dorian stared at Sister Helena with wide, softened eyes. The weight in his chest felt lighter. Something in him had changed quietly but deeply. The priest slowly stood up again, wiping his eyes. Sister Helena finally lifted her hands from the piano and placed them on her lap. She sat very still, her breath steadying, her eyes slightly wet though no tears fell. She did not look up at the crowd yet. She needed a moment, and the room gave her that moment. Every person there knew they had witnessed something rare, something they would not forget. And though the music had ended, the feeling in the room had not died. It lingered, soft, warm, and deeply human, waiting for what would come next. The hall was still filled with a soft quiet after the last notes of her playing faded. People sat in silence, unsure whether they should clap, speak, or simply breathe. Something warm and heavy stayed in the air, like the echo of a prayer that had reached everyone at the same time. Even the old lights hanging from the ceiling seemed to glow a little differently, as if they had softened in the presence of what had just happened. Sister Helena stepped back from the piano, her hands still slightly trembling. She felt overwhelmed, but not in a bad way. The music had come from a place deep inside her, a place she rarely visited. For years, she had kept that part of herself quiet, hidden under the calmer routines of her life at the convent. But something in the room tonight had stirred her old memories, and she had let them guide her fingers. The people seated in the hall stared at her with wide eyes. Some wiped tears quietly, not wanting others to notice. A few lowered their heads as if ashamed of the laughter and dismissive looks they had given her earlier. The priest stood near the front, his hands folded, his face carrying a look of deep emotion, as though he too had heard something that touched a long-buried part of his life. But the one who seemed most shaken was the man who had mocked her. Dorian. He had been so loud earlier, almost proud of his disbelief, as if doubting others gave him some kind of strength. His earlier words, shouted in front of everyone, still floated in people's memories. If she plays the piano, I'll repent. At the time, the crowd had laughed with him, but now none of them were laughing, not even he. He stood completely still in the same spot, as though someone had carved him out of stone. His arms were no longer crossed, his face no longer smug. Instead, he looked lost. His eyes were fixed on the piano, as if the music still lingered there, haunting him in the best and worst ways. For a moment, Sister Helena wondered if she should walk away quietly or wait for someone to speak. She didn't want to embarrass him. She knew pride was a shield many people used when they feared revealing their pain or weakness. But before she could take a single step, Dorian moved. He walked forward slowly, his steps unsure, like a man waking from a very long dream. People watched him closely, some curious, others nervous. No one knew what he was going to do. He himself probably did not know. When he reached Sister Helena, he stopped just a few feet away. His throat moved as he swallowed. His hands shook slightly. The strong, confident man from earlier was gone. What stood before her now was someone different, someone humbled. "May I speak with you?" he asked quietly. His voice, once loud enough to fill corners of the hall, came out soft and strained, barely above a whisper. Sister Helena nodded gently. He looked down at the floor for a long moment, gathering the courage to speak again. When he lifted his head, his eyes were red, not from anger, but from something deeper: regret, memory, longing, or perhaps all of them together. "I didn't expect," he said, then stopped because the words wouldn't form. He shook his head lightly and tried again. "I didn't expect music like that. I didn't expect it to reach me." The room stayed quiet, every ear listening. He went on. "I haven't felt something like that in years. I didn't think I could feel anything like that again." He took a breath, letting it out shakily. "When you played, it reminded me of someone," he said softly. "My mother." Sister Helena's face softened. She didn't say anything. She simply listened. "She used to play," he continued. "Not professionally, not even well sometimes, but she would play in the evenings when the house was quiet. It was her way of keeping us all together. After she passed, I pushed everything away. The memories, the good things. I tried not to think about any of it." He paused. "Maybe that's why I've turned into someone who mocks things I don't understand. I didn't want to feel anything anymore." Sister Helena's voice came out warm and calm. "Music can reach places inside us that we forget exist." He nodded, tears finally gathering in his eyes. "Yes, and what you played tonight, it broke through everything I'd buried." The hall remained silent, except for the faint hum of the old lights. Finally, Dorian straightened his back, even though his voice trembled. "I said I would repent if you played that piano." People shifted in their seats. Some leaned in, others held their breath. "And I meant it," he said. Before anyone could react, Dorian walked to the front of the hall. He turned to face the crowd. There was no pride in his posture, no arrogance, no showmanship. just quiet sincerity. I have been harsh to many of you, he said, his voice steady but emotional. I have mocked things that mattered to you. I have dismissed faith, kindness, and even simple acts of goodness. And worst of all, I have been closed off to the very things that once shaped me into someone better. The people in the hall watched him with surprise. Some nodded slowly, others exchanged glances. They had seen Dorian speak many times before, but never like this. I don't know what I will become after tonight, he continued, but I do know this. Something changed in me, and I want to really try to be better, to live with more heart than I have been living with. The priest stepped forward gently, placing a hand on Dorian's shoulder in a comforting way. Change begins with honesty, he said softly, and you have taken a brave first step. Dorian lowered his head humbly. Sister Helena watched from the side, her hands clasped lightly together. She didn't feel pride or triumph. She felt grateful that her music had touched someone who needed it, even if she had not known it at the time. The priest invited everyone to stand and join in a short moment of reflection. People rose slowly, bowing their heads, letting the quiet settle over them again afterward. Many approached Dorian to shake his hand or offer gentle words. He accepted each gesture with humility. He didn't rush or try to escape. He stayed, letting the kindness around him wash over what had once been a hardened part of him. Sister Helena approached him once the line had grown smaller. You showed courage tonight, she said quietly. He looked at her with genuine appreciation. You showed me a part of myself I thought I had lost. She reached into her pocket and gently placed her rosary into his hand. Carry this, she said, not as a reminder of me, but as a reminder of the moment you chose to open your heart again. Dorian swallowed hard and nodded, closing his fingers around the rosary. The night slowly came to an end. People left the hall speaking softly, as if afraid to disturb the memory of the music that had changed everything. The large doors closed behind them one by one, leaving the hall peaceful and dim. Outside, the sky was clear and full of stars. The town lay quiet beneath the night. Dorian walked out last, holding the rosary, feeling the cool air sweep across his face. He looked up at the sky and let out a long breath he didn't know he had been holding. For the first time in years, he felt lighter, and as he walked away, the memory of the music still followed him, not haunting him, but guiding him from that day forward. The town would tell the story of the evening when a quiet nun played a simple piano in an old parish hall, and a man who had lost his way found the beginning of a new path. And they would say it happened because, for one moment, music opened a door no one expected, including him.